You know, child, sometimes life doesn't break you loudly. Sometimes it breaks you with silence. Silence at a fancy dinner table where your own daughter lowers her gaze instead of holding your hand. That evening, I wore my favorite burgundy dress, the one my late husband James always said made me look like autumn sunshine. I even dabbed on the perfume Simone once bought me for Mother's Day. It smelled like hope, like belonging. When I knocked at their high-rise door, my heart felt warm. I thought I was stepping into love, but I was walking straight into humiliation. Preston opened the door, smile on his lips, but something cold in his eyes. Simone followed behind him, elegant, distant, different. No tight hug, just a polite arm around my shoulder. It felt less like a welcome, more like a reminder to behave. Inside, their condo was beautiful. Too beautiful. Everything looked staged, even my daughter's smile. They had guests, people who spoke about business jets, market shares, and art auctions. I tried to join in. I really did, but every time I spoke, someone changed the topic, as if my words were made of dust. When dinner was served, I walked toward the dining table. 8 empty chairs, 8 shining plates, and just as I pulled a chair, I felt a hand grip my arm. Preston. He smiled, but his fingers pressed deep into my skin. "Elar," he said smoothly, "the kitchen might be more comfortable for someone like you."
Someone like me? The room fell silent. No one looked at me, except my daughter. I looked at her, silently begging, "Say something, anything." But she lowered her head. She pointed toward the kitchen, like I was their maid, like I didn't belong. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just grabbed my purse, stood quietly, and walked to the door. As I left, I heard Preston whisper to his guests. She wouldn't understand our lifestyle, not her level. Not my level. My daughter said nothing. Not then, not ever. I walked out into the cold night air. The city kept shining. People kept laughing. Life kept going. But inside me, something old and loyal died. I ended up at the same park bench where Simone once fed pigeons as a little girl, where James once held my hand and told me he'd grow old with me. And he did, until he couldn't anymore. I cried, quietly, like someone who'd finally run out of places to hide their pain. Weeks passed, no calls from Simone, not even a text. Until one morning, a letter arrived from a law firm summoning me downtown. I thought it was paperwork about James' estate, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of something I never expected. Pen. Mrs. Sterling, you are the sole heir of Mr. Wallace Jenkins, your great-uncle. His estate requires your immediate presence. I barely remembered Uncle Wally. He was quiet, polite, eccentric, and apparently rich beyond imagination. His gift to me? Not just money, not just properties, but poetic, divine justice, including ownership of the very building where Simone and Preston lived. Yes, child, I became the landlady of the man who sent me to the kitchen. That night, something inside me woke up. Not anger, not revenge, but purpose. This was no longer just about me. It was about dignity. It was about showing my daughter who I truly was. Not a servant, not a burden, but her mother. And her mother was far from powerless.
You see, child, real power, it doesn't shout. It waits, watches, moves with dignity. When I discovered I owned the very building where Preston and Simone lived, I didn't storm into their house or bang on their door to announce my victory. No, I sat at my kitchen table with my chamomile tea, and I remembered every word that man had spoken to me. A woman like you doesn't belong here. Oh, how wrong he was. My attorney, Mr. Marcus King, looked me in the eye that day and said, "Mrs. Sterling, you're not just wealthy, you're in control." Control. Such a powerful, elegant word. That night, I slept without tears. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. The next day, I visited the building as the official owner. The property manager, Kevin Stone, a kind and nervous young man, showed me around. When he handed me the tenant files, I saw it. Preston and Simone Hayes, late on rent, multiple complaints, financial instability. The perfect mask was cracking. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I simply told Kevin, from now on, all communication regarding apartment 14B, Preston and Simone Hayes, comes directly through me. He nodded, no questions. You see, child, I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And sometimes, truth arrives quietly, dressed like consequences. Over the next few weeks, I visited the building often, but never when Simone was home. I saw glimpses of her life through Kevin's updates. She looked thinner, quieter, like a flower bending under too much wind, while Preston, well, his shine was fading. His expensive suits remained, but the light inside them had dimmed. He had lost a major client. His credit cards were nearly maxed out. He was drowning, quietly, privately, secretly, and no one knew, except me. One afternoon, as I sat in the manager's office, I saw her, my daughter, stepping out of the elevator, carrying grocery bags with generic brands, clutching a coupon booklet, wearing a faded dress that used to be full of life, but now hung loose as if hope had slipped out of it. I saw her as the mother I am, and I wanted to run to her, hug her, tell her everything, that I owned this building, that she was safe, that I would always protect her. But I didn't, because healing cannot be spoon-fed. It has to bloom from within. That night, I sat alone on my porch, mug of tea in my hand, and I made a decision. I would not break them with rage. I would break them with truth. So I hired a private investigator, not to spy, but to document truth. If Preston was indeed living a life of deceit, I wanted my daughter to see it with her own eyes. And learn she would. Weeks went by. The investigator delivered his first report. Preston was not just losing money. He was losing loyalty, faithfulness, honesty. His mistress, young, polished, carefree, met him at fancy places he could barely afford, while my daughter stayed home, comparing prices for soap. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just arrogance. It was betrayal. So I set the wheels in motion. I didn't push. I didn't confront. I simply stopped protecting Preston from his own truth. No more rent extensions. No more special considerations. No more shielding him from policy. The rules he once ignored began to rule him. The shallow life he built on appearance began to crumble. And I watched, not with joy, not with vengeance, but with justice. Then came the moment I had quietly prepared for. The investigator called. She knows. She saw them. Simone had accidentally walked into a cafe where Preston sat, smiling, with another woman. And in that moment, everything she had protected from falling apart fell apart. My daughter saw him not as the husband she trusted, but as the stranger he truly was. 1 hour later, Kevin called me from the building office. "Ma'am,
They're arguing, loudly. She's packing a suitcase. I closed my eyes and waited. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet living room, I knew something was about to change. Not just for Simone, but for me. Because, child, when truth arrives, it doesn't knock, it enters.
Child, when a mother waits, she waits with both hope and heartbreak. Those days after Simone left Preston's house were some of the longest of my life. I didn't call her. I didn't chase her. I didn't send messages. Because sometimes a daughter must walk through her own storm before she returns to shelter. On the third evening, at exactly 10:06 p.m., my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there she was, my baby, but not the same one I had raised. Her eyes were swollen, hair messy, hands trembling, suitcase in hand. But worst of all, her voice was small. Mama, can I stay? I didn't say a word. I just pulled her into my arms and held her. She didn't cry loudly. No. She cried like someone who didn't want to be heard. The quiet kind of crying. The kind that hurts more. I made her chamomile tea, the same one I used to make when she had nightmares about thunder as a little girl. She sat at the kitchen table, holding the mug like she was clinging to warmth, to safety. Then, like a cracked whisper, she said, Mama, I am so ashamed. I let him treat you that way. I defended him. I forgot who I was. I forgot who you were. I reached for her hand. My sweet girl, I said calmly. Shame is for those who never learn. You have learned, and that's strength. Silence. Reflection. That night, she talked. About how Preston convinced her I was old-fashioned, unrefined, embarrassing. How he slowly planted tiny seeds of shame in her mind. That is how emotional manipulation works. Not all at once. No, it creeps in gently, disguised as logic. Mama, she whispered, I wanted to defend you that night, but you were afraid of him, I finished for her. Her eyes widened. Yes, she said, I was afraid of him. That truth, child, was harder to hear than all the insults Preston had thrown at me. For the next few days, she slept, peacefully, like a child returning to safety. She started eating again, smiling again, talking about her dreams again. Simone had not forgotten who she was. She had just paused her identity to fit into someone else's story. And now she was writing her own. One morning, she came to the kitchen, hair brushed, eyes softer. Mama, she said, I want to file for divorce. I want to start over. I want to heal. I didn't hesitate. You won't do it alone, I told her. And yes, I will take care of the legal fees, not because you need me to, but because a daughter should never start her healing by worrying about money. She cried again. But this time, the tears felt different. They were not tears of pain. They were tears of release. The next week, I took her to meet Marcus, my attorney. He explained everything gently. Psychological manipulation, emotional neglect, financial betrayal, infidelity, control. He looked at her and said, You have a strong case. Simone, my once timid daughter, sat up straighter. She no longer looked like a woman seeking escape. She looked like a woman ready to reclaim her life. That evening, we walked through the park. The same park where I once cried alone after being sent away like a maid. But this time, I wasn't alone. My daughter held my arm, like she always used to. She paused by the bench. Yes, the same one. She asked, Did you come here that night? Yes, child. I sat right here. She touched the wooden seat, gently, like touching pain. And then she did something unexpected. She knelt down, right in front of me, took my hands. Mama, she said, I don't just want to heal. I want to make it right. I want to honor you. I want to rebuild what I let break. I stroked her hair, just like she was a little girl, and I told her, there is nothing to rebuild. Because our love, my child, was never destroyed, just hidden under disappointment. But now, we found it again. That night, she fell asleep peacefully, and I watched her quietly thinking, this child, my child, had finally come home, not just to my house, but to herself. But what about Preston? Oh, child, his story was just beginning to unravel. What happens when the man who thought he had everything suddenly discovers he owns nothing, not even his truth? And when he finally learns who really owns his home?
You know, child, truth doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits down, and waits to be noticed. 2 weeks after Simone filed for divorce, Preston finally showed up at my door. Not like the polished man with slicked hair and expensive cologne, but a wreck. Eyes red, clothes wrinkled, voice shaking. I opened the door slowly. He looked at me, not with arrogance, but with fear. Mrs. Sterling, please, don't evict me. I'll lose everything. I stepped aside and motioned him in. He sat at my kitchen table. Yes, the same table where I once sat with tears in my coffee, after he told me I wasn't worthy enough to sit at his. Funny how life spins the table around. He looked around my small, cozy home. No marble floors, no chandeliers, but warmth. Something his penthouse never had. He stared down at his trembling hands. I treated you terribly, he whispered. I thought you were just old, ordinary, powerless. I looked at him calmly in the eye. No, Preston, I said softly. You didn't think I was powerless. You thought kindness was weakness. And that, your mistake. He swallowed hard. Please, don't evict me. I have nowhere to go. I leaned forward gently. You once told me I didn't belong at your table. Well, turns out I own the table now. He went pale. I didn't gloat, didn't mock. Real strength doesn't humiliate. It stands tall, quietly. Then I said the words that ended it. Preston, you will vacate the apartment in 10 days. Not because I hate you, not because I want revenge, but because you no longer live where dignity lives. Days passed. He packed slowly, full of regret, not boxes. Tenants watched from balconies, whispering, not out of gossip, but relief. You see, misery spreads, but so does peace. And peace was returning to that building, finally. The other morning he moved out. I stood at a distance, watching. He loaded his last box into a dented cab. Nothing fancy, no fancy suit, no wife, no applause at the glass of wine at the table he thought was too good for me. Just silence. The same kind of silence he once gave me. He saw me, stopped. We didn't speak. He just lowered his head. And I silently forgave him. Not for him, but for me. Because forgiveness, child, isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a gift you return to yourself. Weeks passed, and Simone began to bloom again. She got a stable job, started therapy, reconnected with friends, smiled more. One evening, while we were cooking together, laughing over burned onions, she said, Mama, I didn't just survive that marriage. I escaped it. And I smiled. You didn't escape, child. You returned to yourself. A few months later, something beautiful happened.
I donated one of my properties, an entire apartment complex, to help women leaving abusive, controlling, or manipulative relationships. Not a shelter, not a charity, a place of rebirth. We called it the Phoenix House because sometimes we don't just break, we burn. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a young woman with 2 children hugged me tight and said, "Thank you for believing we were not broken, just paused." And in her eyes, I saw Simone, and in her eyes, I saw myself. That night, sitting in my old armchair under a soft lamp, I whispered to myself, softly, gently, "You were never too old. You were never unworthy. You were never weak. You were just waiting to remember." And child, that is how I learned revenge is temporary, but dignity is forever. What if the person you once thought was weak turned out to be the strongest of all? Stay with me. I have more stories, real ones.